Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another episode of Relating to DevSecOps, where we explore the development, security, and operational issues of today so that we can solve real world problems with people that face them. And finally, after long promises and empty promises, we finally have a couple of great guests joining Mike and I today um, to talk about shifting left in security, but I'd love to just open it up and let them introduce themselves. Marcus Hallberg, why don't we start with you? Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. And yes, my name is Marcus, and I work at Spotify as a security engineer, primarily in the detection and response team, but also doing some work for the cloud security infrastructure team. So, yeah, fantastic to be here, and let's do this.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we also have Mikhail, right? I tried to do this beforehand and get your name right, but I'm gonna keep messing it up.
That's all right. I forgive you. Thanks for
Okay,
having us.
great.
I'm Mikhail. I'm a security engineer working in application security at Spotify.
Great. Thank you. So I would love to get to know you both a little bit better, and I'm sure Mike would too. Mike is also joining us again, as always. Um, could you tell, let's start with Marcus, can you give us a little bit of your background? I know you mentioned you do some development and things of that nature, a little bit of your background and how you ended up in your role. And I'd love to hear more about some of the non-security things that you've maybe had in the past that brought you to security rather than sort of dive into your security history, because I think it's always interesting to see what sort of molded you into security.
Yeah, definitely. I think my journey into security is, everybody's journey is different, right? So for me, that interest was really spiked when I was doing my master's degree in civil engineering, and I was living for a year in Spain, where I took my first ever security course at their university there in Granada, Spain. So doing a bit of like general encryption, security, network protocols, that kind of really spiked my interest. And that kind of stayed with me until I graduated and got my first job as a tech sale graduate for IBM.
Amazing. Would you call yourself more of a security person that likes to develop or a developer that loves security?
Oh, that's a tricky one. I have a lot of respect for developers, so I wouldn't call myself a developer, rather like script kiddie type thing, like I can code and put stuff together, but I wouldn't be like a developer per se. But I can put code together to do what I need to in my role. So that's sort of how I would phrase it. So trying to solve a problem, figure out what's tool already in place, if I have to write something on my own, integrate stuff. That's usually how I go about to solve my problems.
Very cool. And Mikhail, how are you doing? Same question to you? What brought you to security and sort of the things that you do every day?
I guess I'm in the opposite camp than Marcus. So I'm computer science trained. Previously worked in standing up DevOps pipelines and platforms. Working in data engineering and ETL, primarily building the DevOps pipelines to enable ETL. And I've always had an interest in security. Took plenty of security courses in college. Didn't really have an opportunity to work in it until more recently, so kind of naturally gravitated towards it once an opportunity opened up.
Got it. And so, same question to you. Would you sort of consider yourself an engineer or a developer that is more in love with security than the other way around then?
I would say so, yeah. Um, on a build or buy decision, I think my heart is with build. That's the sort of
Okay.
the developer mindset.
Very cool. It sounds like you're in the right spot then. Um, well, nice to meet you both, and again, welcome. The one question that Mike and I revisit every year, or that I revisit every year, is what is DevSecOps? And we say DevSecOps in 2022 and 2023. And I think this entire podcast started because we were just tired of hearing the buzzword over and over again and not understanding what it means. So I always like to ask folks, what does DevSecOps mean to you? And how would you define it, in a blurb or in an elevator pitch? And we can start with Mikhail first this time around. But what does DevSecOps mean to you?
Sure. So having worked in DevOps, for me, DevSecOps has always meant adding an element of security to the normal software lifecycle steps that we face in DevOps. So whether that means tooling or just review processes, always having sort of a security mindset throughout that.
Got it. Cool. Marcus, what about you? Do you have a difference of opinion? Same opinion?
I think Mikhail put it pretty well. I think like for me, when I think about the word, it sort of means also like how you can make the whole process smoother for all the teams, right? Because developers love to develop, that's the core, that's what they know. And bringing security into that piece to kind of enable them to do that safe and sound is sort of how I tend to think about it, like finding things early, reducing time and cost in doing so, and building secure systems that scale. Like I remember when I did my first coding project, had no experience with Python, put some stuff together, spun up a VM, put it there, opened it up to the world, and realized I made a ton of mistakes that I had to repair and learn a lot from. So, with that in mind, I think that's why this topic is so interesting to talk about.
Got it. Yeah, well, we do hear different definitions of DevSecOps, and I'm interested to hear more and more, especially as we get through not only guests that are focused on security, but in applications and development and infrastructure and IT and program management and product development and product management. Um, and one of the things that is always a hot topic in DevSecOps or in application security, and certainly today across the board, not only in application and software development, but I've seen this in infrastructure and everything is this concept of shifting left. And we've talked about this a bit in the pre-show, and it's something that I know that you all wanted to talk about. So, in your own words, what is shift left in the context of DevSecOps, or even in just the context of how you're thinking about it today?
I can kick us off.
All right.
Um, so working in application security, shift left is pretty close to my daily work. There are plenty of tools and uh, tech plenty of tools and automations that we can run after the fact, after something is deployed. While with the shift left mentality, we try to put those tools more in the developer space, where they can run it as part of their development sort of processes. Um, so I think shift left is a cautious push of tooling, security tooling, and security mindsets towards every engineer. So I don't think it should be sort of forced uh, upon engineers, or they should be completely and solely responsible for their security. I don't think that's the right shift left approach, although I've heard some positions kind of implying that. But I think they should be enabled. So given the opportunity to sort of turn on security, kind of like a switch, where it makes sense for their applications and for their normal development.
Understood. So I guess abstracting on that, or not abstracting, but just expanding on that a little bit. When you say it shouldn't be forced, or that you've seen some methodologies or some ideas where folks are trying to force developers, what do you mean? Like inserting gates at the left side of the development lifecycle, or could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, gates would be a good way to put it. So having some sort of quality checks that you're not able to pass. I've seen it go to extremes of blocking deployments if some tools aren't running, or some you know report isn't being sent to where it's expected, uh, which I think is a little bit more forceful rather than enabling, in the sense of uh, you know with access to the right information, with a proper understanding of what the security tool is telling you, each individual application owner is probably gonna know better if it makes sense to still deploy, to still continue with their development lifecycle, rather than security coming down with the axe and saying, you can't go anywhere until you check these boxes.
Yeah, you're blocking them earlier and earlier, which means they're more and more frustrated with you.
Exactly.
Yeah, I had one follow up too. You also said shift the mentality left. How have you seen that kind of adopted in environments you've worked in?
I think security training goes a long way. Just
Mhm.
making some sort of, not computer-based trainings that everyone takes on just phishing emails or something like that.
Death by
But
PowerPoint.
yeah, exactly. Flipping through a PowerPoint or uh, sort of funny simulated scenarios. But making uh, various workshops and more hands-on, uh, kind of exercises available to the developers in your organization.
Yeah, makes sense.
I think to add to that, I think the key piece is to like understand the situation and daily life of a developer and also make them understand why we have certain checks and balances in place, why certain steps are important. One of the things that I was impressed about when I joined Spotify is the environment we provide to our developers, where let's say if you want to build a Java application or a plugin or something, we have a whole suite of tools and pre-made templates and automated testing that is kind of put in place that speeds you up on that journey, which creates it a very, I would say, easy environment for people to start shipping and deploying code in a quick and safe way. Obviously, we always work to improve that, but I think in comparison to other companies I've been at, situations where teams are asked to, build their own CI/CD or write their own, Jenkins setup or whatever. I think that's when you have a different situation where we try to put all the smart people together and say, how can we create a foundation for all of our developers to build safe and secure code and ship it?
I definitely like that. Especially, to me, it sounds like not only are you shifting left in the mentality of just where security is considered in the development lifecycle, but also um, how security is shifting their own mindset to enable engineering and developers to be secure rather than putting the active or restrictive processes onto engineers and development. That's a really important thing to consider as well, because there's a major cultural impact internally, um, depending on how you apply security. And speaking of that, how do you see shift left being done correctly and incorrectly? So I know we talked about gates as one of these ideas, but do you have any failure stories from your past that made you or come around to this style or idea of shifting left?
Marcus, you want to go first this time?
I can try, yeah. Um, it's a delicate topic for sure, and I think the from what I've seen, and to kind of tie this a bit into my team's responsibility with detection and response, there's definitely been cases at places I've worked at where that mentality becomes like a bit too tedious, like stuff which makes sense on paper but not in real life. Certain things like, let's say if you have, a bug bounty program or you apply something similar to that, that's a great find, but it's hard to say like, well, can we hack our application beforehand, or can we like what can we do internally in that process versus externally? So I think depending on what the topic is, there's definitely places where I would say that the shift left mentality promises more than it can deliver, depending on the company. So I think in a case by case basis, some of the things we do here at Spotify work and we have implemented them in a way. But there's definitely other things where we said like, okay, this is maybe a bit too either too tricky, or where we say like, this makes sense for some companies, but maybe not for us.
No, I like that answer. I think this one thing that I can sort of think about is how people apply agile. You know, it's like you see, oh, we're agile, or we're Scrum or safe, but then you're like, well, you're not really following any of this framework, but you do have sprint cycles,
Exactly.
so that's good. You know, but
Yeah. Yeah.
We're
And everybody wants to
yeah,
be agile, right? That's a great
yeah,
word.
we're more efficient because we spend 6 hours every 2 weeks in a room figuring out what we're going to do for the next
that's
2
right,
weeks.
that's right. So that kind of brings me to something too I wanted to ask, and maybe this is the same question a different way. So you can certainly call me out if it is. But are there any common misconceptions around the idea of shifting left that you've had to address or clarify frequently that you would want to bring up and maybe offer some advice to folks facing the same um, pushback or feedback from other elements of the business?
I think that kind of echoes your previous question and depends on how you're implementing your shift left approach. Um, as an example, so the project templates that Marcus mentioned earlier, we have a vulnerability scanner that's enabled in those by default, right? So lots of users like that and sort of praise our team for enabling, security checks as part of their regular build cycles. Um, but the sort of outcome of that has been is that lots of scans happen. Like our coverage is great. Lots of vulnerabilities are discovered, which is also great. Not a lot of vulnerabilities are fixed, uh, strictly from the shift left of the tooling. So looking at our regular, sort of drew up some metrics in preparation for today. Looking at our regular remediation timelines, uh, we noticed that month to month, our overall newly discovered vulnerabilities still outpace our remediated ones, right? And that could be due to new assets being stood up. There's this constant battle of the inventory size. However, when we've taken these more centralized approach towards remediation, we've had a lot greater successes. This is where I can throw some metrics your way. So we recently started doing something we call vulnerability workshops, where we'll sit down with an org unit and kind of advise them on where they can get the most bang for their buck. Um, we've had a great opportunity with our podcast mission, basically the part of the organization that deals with podcasts, where by looking at their supply chain for the software that they import into their projects, we're able to find common assets that they're using that if they patch and then all the other projects that import it, they'll also receive the patch. So we're able to reduce their vulnerabilities by 34% in a matter of 2 days,
Oh,
as an example. While
Wow.
their average return, or maybe not return, but average remediation rate was about like 10% a month for things that were discovered, in the previous period. And also, October was Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we, again, centrally as an application security team, ran a fixathon. So trying to promote and encourage fixing of vulnerabilities through some awesome prizes. I don't know how much the prizes were the encouraging factor or the fact that we added additional guidance and support during the month of October. But company wide, we were able to reduce vulnerabilities by 36%, right? So in 1 month.
Oh,
And this is in the tens of thousands of vulnerabilities that we discover across our assets. So pretty hefty numbers there.
that's incredible.
hmm.
Now, just to tie this back, so what aspect of the mentality of shift left were you applying during your remediation activities that, and the reason I'm asking is I think, folks will listen to this and think it's a remediation activity, which we would traditionally think of as something that's on the right side of the SDLC. But I heard you speak of, about a few things that echo what we were talking about before, like developer education and maybe this activity of analyzing applications for the most robust or comprehensive remediation for a broad brushstroke and things of that nature. So, how can folks listening to this, attach the shift left mentality to things like remediation? Can you just help expand or clarify what your approach is and how you would look at, or how you are looking at remediation as a left shifted activity?
Sure. Yeah. So I think the part that echoes the shift left mentality in this is that we made the tooling available for developers to run locally on their own, laptops, on their endpoints, as well as part of their CI process. So that's also part of their regular sort of BAU CI. However, all that resulted in is lots and lots of reports, lots and lots of findings, and at a certain point, there's a threshold that's crossed where developers don't know what to tackle first. We haven't found a good way to shift left that sort of holistic, security-minded analysis of someone's org and all of their assets, right? So that's kind of where we stepped in with the workshops to pinpoint the places where, again, the developers in an org unit would get the most bang for their buck. What enabled rapid iteration on fixing those vulnerabilities is the fact that they didn't have to wait until their code was shipped to find out the results of their fix. They could recreate all of that locally. They could confirm it in their CI. So there's already like 2 checks in place, and by the time they merge, there's an overall greater confidence that the same vulnerabilities won't be found in production.
Very cool. No, I mean, well said, and I agree. I just wanted to make sure that point landed well, because I do think that, just like we were saying, the difference in DevSecOps, when people think about shift left, I think the first activity that they'll take on is kind of like, well, I have this concept of fixing vulnerabilities, after something is deployed or after something hits the CI/CD, and so they think of remediation as at a particular point in the SDLC. And so when they think about shifting left, it's like, oh, well, maybe I will do threat modeling, or maybe I'll do requirements analysis or something along those lines. So I think it's important to say that you're not only applying security activities at different phases of the SDLC, but you can bring activities that typically happen further right into the left side. Would you say that that's an accurate representation of what you're saying?
I would say if sort of budgets and resources allow, that shift left should be an extension rather than the replacement for the traditional security checks, right? You still want to have that confidence that what is actually happening in production reflects what was detected pre-production. So having these multiple checks in place, I think, kind of gives us the greatest amount of confidence that at all stages, there is no provenance of the vulnerability from one environment to the next.
You just hit the next buzzword, which is shift everywhere, right? That's what they're doing now. We're not selling shift left, we're selling shift everywhere.
If budgets allow, right? I mean, that's the epitome.
Yeah.
And then it'll be shift nowhere.
I had one other. Exactly. I had one other question about something you kind of touched on. Was it sounded like education on these vulnerabilities was helpful to actually remediate them. What do you think we're missing in terms of education in general? Like, if people kick AppSec reports or CVEs over and they're like, hey, fix this stuff. What was impactful to get developers to fix these things? Was it the impact? Was it the steps to remediate? Kind of what do you feel like made the biggest impact beyond the prizes?
It hasn't been that long since October. Maybe it was the prizes. We'll need to.
It's chopped off.
We'll need to do an agile retrospective and figure that out. Yeah, I think the main thing that our developers took away from these workshops is how to look at their software supply chain more holistically and identify these common points, like what are they using in multiple places, and how to use the tools to discover that. So I think part of it was technical training in a maybe a more recent topic, right? I don't know if supply chains have been looked at, in terms of like dependency chains and the more complicated aspects of building software. But I think that was a big thing that I can say with confidence we sort of taught to the developers we're working with.
Very cool.
In terms of
That's
the
awesome.
CVEs and vulnerabilities themselves, there can be there's an opportunity to educate developers on what is more impactful to their service, especially if we're helping to break ties. Like if you have multiple critical CVEs, how do you prioritize them? It takes a little bit of security expertise to actually go through your code, to go through the vulnerability. And in some cases, you may even find that you're not using the functionality that is vulnerable, right? There are often caveats with CVEs, and you may find that a particular findings were false positives, and your previously massive reports aren't actually so massive when you look at what actually applies to your software. So there is an opportunity for that, but I think that's a much more complicated thing to do, kind of centrally, just because different developers are using different languages, different frameworks, and this all varies on a case by case basis.
Interesting.
Yep.
Now, when just going back to that, when you're identifying things earlier in the cycle and putting these tools in the hands of developers, what do you do, or what advice do you have for when you can't triage, everything that's happening in their tool set that early on? Well, and maybe I'm assuming the wrong things, but do you have any triage process when you're moving remediation activity to the left?
Maybe elaborate a little bit on that more.
Yeah, like I'm
When I
thinking
think
that.
of triage, I think of like incident response triage.
Got it. Yeah, no, I understand why that's not clear. So if you're discovering vulnerabilities on the right side, usually a security engineer or someone is validating the vulnerability. So validation is probably a much better word here. Um, and when you were talking about shifting left, you're saying, well, we had a little bit of trouble with the volume of vulnerabilities. Is there any validation process that happens, or is it just that you are tweaking the checks that are happening earlier in the process? Or how do you handle the volume of vulnerabilities that are being discovered by engineers by providing them with these tool sets? How do you ensure that those aren't false positives, or is there a validation process, or have the tools just come that far in modern tool sets that you're not worried about it as much?
To be honest, I can't say we found a good way to handle that in a shift left approach, right? I think developers primarily reach out to us, and we kind of, ad hoc take a look at if something applies to them. We have found instances where, for example, a vulnerability will have a network-based attack vector, and our perimeter routing infrastructure is guaranteed to drop the vulnerable traffic. Like it just won't make it through. So assigning those vulnerabilities to the the things on our intranet, like our servers, our backend services, just doesn't make sense. And we can kind of update the tools accordingly, put in the appropriate configurations to not have those types of vulnerabilities bother our users.
Got it.
But I don't think that's left exercise necessarily.
No, I mean, it sounds like you have that your engineers and your software developers have to have both this education that you're talking about to be able to validate their own issues. So you can't have green from a security perspective. Engineers really adopt this shift left process. It sounds like it seems that both of these things have to go together. You're going to be putting security information in front of engineers, and they need to be able to validate that themselves to a degree that it's not slowing them down. So it's a joint effort. Is that accurate?
I would say that's pretty accurate. Yeah. We work with engineers with varying amounts of experience. So some are able to, and varying amounts of experience on their own teams, as well as with, experience with security. So we get varying amounts of feedback, and we're able to sort of connect the dots and see, when there is a repeating pattern, something may be a false positive with the tool, through this communication channel with the engineers. So it's sort of educating for us both. I think it goes in both directions.
Cool.
I think another piece there that is worth mentioning is also like if we look at the we talked about the left and right here a bit, right? So if we say that, for example, the detection and response team finds something during runtime, then this whole process also becomes so much more interesting, right? So if we can track everything that is run in production and trace that back through our CI/CD to all the commits, all the code that is running in a container, then that is helping our team, and it's helping us also in the engagement with our developers, because we might find things that haven't been reported as a vulnerability, but stuff that we see being exploited or being attempted, which could provide that feedback loop to the rest of the organization as well. So I think that's where tying sort of the detection and response capabilities together with, AppSec, CI/CD, our developer community, that combination becomes so interesting for us to look at. So we have stuff that we have found which hasn't been part of those regular scans and findings, and vice versa. So that's why I think this whole discussion and like including more aspects to this is quite interesting as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was actually gonna touch on that because I wanted to kind of get your opinion because you're on the other side of the shift left is I don't feel like we do a great job of kind of the AppSec team talks to the detection and response team, the incident response team, because we're both looking at the same patterns, but one's trying to prevent that pattern from appearing, one's looking at the results of that pattern. Have you seen? I mean, you're talking about kind of an after action report almost, or an after action workshop to work through why that issue happened, but have you found success in ways to be more integrated in the design or upfront so that the detection and response is more effective?
I would definitely say so. Like what I think of based on your question is we have definitely had examples both in incidents and during regular like investigations and this, detection and response triage, to use that word again, where we have reached out to people in our developer community and said, hey, this way you're testing here or this plugin here, this is not something that we would recommend. Here's a different approach, what we would suggest. Also the same where we have had, vulnerability findings, as Mikhail explained, where the reporting itself might be accurate, but the way to exploit that actual vulnerability isn't applicable. Or we can say, oh, if you as a developer team, if you did this instead, based on what we see and how we understand the infrastructure, you can actually disregard those findings, but instead, this is where you need to upscale and improve. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that answers your question in full, but happy to expand on that further.
No, and Ken and I have kind of touched on this before, where we say like, app teams should be building things like logging the right way so that incident response teams have what they need, because there's nothing worse than knowing that you have some kind of issue going on and you look at the logs and there's no audit trail for what's actually going on. So similar to what you're saying, I mean, that makes a lot of sense, and that's awesome that you guys do that. But I do feel like it is another like maturity level to kind of tie both teams together. I feel like incident response teams, detection teams are just like, those guys look at the logs. We don't, they'll come to us if something really bad is going on, but otherwise we're leaving them to, be in their dark room with all their monitors and everything. So that's definitely
exactly the oddballs, right? Where we're like, well, if those guys come, we're in trouble for sure, right? So I think that's something great you're bringing up here in terms of like partnership, because if if other security teams are kind of sitting on their own, trash talking each other, be like, oh yeah, this problem is for this team or X, Y, and Z, that's never going to solve anything. So one of the things we're trying to do, which is also how we organized ourselves in Spotify in the security space, is that like all of our teams are under one roof. We work together. We have that type of partnership and exchange ideas, which I think creates less barriers than in other organizations I've seen. But definitely, you will always have different teams that focus on different things. But where we see the overlap, that's where we've been able to do some actual change.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think I've said it on this podcast before, but everyone who works in security, it doesn't matter if they're in AppSec or CloudSec, they should all work some incidents, work some log reviews to really understand what these things look like when it actually happens. Otherwise, you're just talking about theory. So it's definitely good to unite those, all the teams and work with the incident response and detection teams. So that's awesome.
Mikhail, you were going to say something?
Yeah, on the similar topic, I can't speak to the success of this because it's still a project in the works, but we're trying to improve on our tools outputs and the way that it ranks vulnerabilities by bringing in some of the data sources that Marcus's detection and response teams subscribe to. So a lot of the threat intel, a lot of like active exploits and what vulnerabilities are popular, according to the threat intel. We're trying to stitch that together and kind of help close the loop, and also bring in a little bit of the DNR insights into developers' hands. Right? Due to just the sensitivity of the data, we can't give everyone access to threat intel. We can't just give everyone access to all of the tooling, but we can take tidbits of metadata that is useful for their space and kind of improve the process that way, and also connect both sides of security.
That's great. I mean, one of the key things that we always come back to um, on the show is, and it sounds like you all are really living this, is just how important the people aspect of DevSecOps is. And I know we have like there's buzzwords when it comes to people, process, technology, and all that kind of stuff. But I think that we constantly are coming back to the fact that without the collaboration and without sharing the same mission, that all of this falls on its face. So the fact that you're in the same room together talking about solutions and trying to bring each other's knowledge streams, whether that's security or engineering or infra or whatever, I think is a really a testament to the fact that you've been successful in this so far. So really, really good to hear. Um, we are coming up on time, but I want to give both of you the opportunity to say anything that you'd like to say, whether you want to plug anything you're working on or where you're going to be, or if you just wanted to have sort of the final word on the topic for shifting left in security.
I can go first, and then we can expand from there with you as well, Mikhail. So in terms of things that I'm excited about, and this kind of comes back to some of the things we talked about, is like when you have a vulnerability or a misconfiguration finding or whatever, like early on in your CI/CD pipeline and when you're building and shipping code. I think one of the things that I'm excited about there is to see how we can better enable people with ways to fix that and remediate that. We have a couple of ways to do that internally today, where we have like suggestions for, oh, we have this finding, here's 3 suggestions that could remediate this. Also, we provide ways for the developers and the teams to get in touch with the teams where we know that is linked to. I think that's an aspect where I think we and other organizations are gonna like scale up and become even better at understanding the context of the services we build and deploy and how we can fix things when we actually find them. Together with what we also said that with how do you prioritize, right? Because if you have 15 findings, you're pressed on time, you might have to have a release done tomorrow, then where do you start, right? So that's where I think the impact and how you validate those findings together with giving the developers better and better ways to remediate that is going to be interesting. So yeah, that's my kind of light bulb that I'm gonna keep an eye on and see what comes up, both here at us, but also in other organizations that have the same problem.
Amazing. Thank you.
I would add 2 things I'm excited for personally. One more practical, one more theoretical. So internally, I've mentioned a lot about our like vulnerability scanner that we run as part of the CI. Outside of that, we also have a dynamic application security scanner and the bug bounty program that my team operates. So those are sort of our checks in production. We make all of the reports available to our developing community through our internal tool called Backstage, and there's also an open source and a paid version of it. Backstage works through a series of plugins, and basically, we have a sister team that built a plugin that aggregates and collects all these reports. The thing I'm excited for is we're looking into externalizing that and making it part of the either the commercial bundle for Backstage or part of the open source offering. So if you have any listeners out there that use Backstage, I know it's a pretty popular project, to sort of stay tuned for more updates in that space.
Yeah, we'll check it out. Maybe we can talk just about Backstage when that happens. That'd be great.
Let's keep in touch. Yeah.
Yeah,
Get the
absolutely.
latest and greatest.
Would love that. It seems like it's right down our alley. So
Awesome. Yeah. And the more theoretical thing that I am looking forward to is automating some of the fixes. So Marcus earlier mentioned cloud misconfigurations. Those typically involve things like excessive policies in your IAM roles, unused firewall rules, right? Where like the traffic shows that you're not really using this. Why do you even have this open?
Mhm.
those things are fairly easy to automate the fixes for. Since just removing a rule, it's typically a single API call, and you're sort of done. With our vulnerability scanner, things get a little bit more complicated. But I've seen some cool published work in the AI and ML space around improving sort of the automations of fixing. So hopefully one day we can not only have sort of an onslaught of vulnerability reports that developers are able to produce all on their own without our help, but also be able to fix things in a timely manner without having to rely on security for every investigation, every sort of report.
That's the dream, right?
Yeah,
Like
and then we can
get
focus on
the yeah, focus on the interesting stuff. Is that what you're gonna say?
the more company-wide sort of broader issues rather than individual assets, which I think is more interesting stuff.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm with you. I'm hopeful. I'm hopefully optimistic as well with where tools are going. Um, Mike, any final words from you?
No, I just want to say thanks for joining us. It's always great to talk to people kind of in the trenches, building new solutions, finding creative ways to solve these issues. So it's always great to hear about it, and it's refreshing. And just thanks for your time for talking with us today.
Thank you for
Yeah,
having us.
really appreciate you both coming on and sharing your backgrounds and your thoughts. And we hope to have you on again. It sounds like we have some more things to talk about, and that would be fun. So, to close it out, just a big thank you to you and everyone that is listening. And we will have more guests. This is just the start. And we promise that you won't have to just listen to Mike and I anymore, but that doesn't mean we're going away. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.